Hi guys and welcome back to my channel. Today's case is going to be the true crime case of a serial killer which was aptly named the Axeman of New Orleans. And this serial killer was never identified. This did happen over a century ago now. It was in New Orleans, Louisiana between 1918 and 1919. I'd just like to give my normal disclaimer. I don't mean any disrespect to anyone I'm going to speak about today. I've just gathered the information from the internet and compiled it into one video for educational purposes. Most of the information is actually from his survivors, and it's disputed that he actually killed 6 people and 6 of them survived. And I say it's disputed because he was never identified and there was no real way of telling whether all of the victims were actually his or maybe even committed more crimes than we were aware of. We just don't know, but these 12 victims are accredited to the Axeman. So the first murder that was accredited to the Axeman actually occurred on the 23rd of May in 1918, and his name was Joseph Maggio. Joseph was an Italian grocer. He was attacked in his sleep as he slept beside his wife. His wife was called Catherine, and the killer broke in. He slit both of their throats, and Catherine's was actually slit so badly that her head was nearly severed completely. And before he left, he found an axe and he hacks at them. It's kind of widely felt that he came back and hacked them with this axe. Maybe because he was a sicko. Maybe it was fun for him and he just hadn't finished having his fun yet, so he went back for more. Or it could have been that he wanted to maybe try and conceal the cause of death. Who knows? Remarkably, Joseph actually survived, and he survived for 2 hours. His brothers came across him, and within minutes of them coming across him, he unfortunately did pass away, but he had actually survived for the 2 hours until they found him. When the police arrived, they found a pile of bloody clothes, and these were the clothes of the killer, so he'd obviously gotten changed and left them behind as evidence. He wasn't concerned with concealing his evidence whatsoever. Just outside the apartment, they found the axe, which was covered in blood, and they also, in a neighbouring property, found the razor that had been used to slit their throats. Basically, he really didn't try to hide anything. He left his bloody clothes there, he left the murder weapons, still full of blood, for the police to find. So the police found where he'd broken in. They found out a small panel had been chiselled out of the door, and that's how he broke into the property. Now, nothing was stolen, so they pretty much immediately ruled out that the motive was a robbery. And it would become a running theme that he would break into people's houses this way if he could, and he would use their own weapons against them, and you will see this as you progress through this case. When the police looked into it, they found that the razor that they actually located, which was used as a weapon, belonged to one of his brothers, Andrew. Andrew was a barber, and this razor had actually come from his shop. Now, one of his employees does recall that Andrew took this razor home for it to be sharpened because it had some nicks in the blade and he wanted to kind of repair it. So the police did look into Andrew as a suspect because of this. And obviously they had a lack of motive of anything else, so they did look into both of the brothers. Another suspicious matter was that the brothers didn't hear anything. And they didn't hear the attack, they didn't hear any screams, any scuffles, nothing. But what they did hear 2 hours later was their brother Joseph groaning because obviously he was dying. And that's when they actually came round. But the brothers said that they'd been drinking that night and they came home and they were intoxicated. And what could the police really say about that? It does cloud your judgment. And they couldn't really do much on the razor side either because, yes, it was his razor, but how many barbershops were there in that vicinity? If somebody had gone into the shop and taken a razor, it would have probably belonged to him anyway, because he was one of the few barbershops in that area. And who's to say that that employee had got that correct, that razor, that exact razor was the one that he took home? I don't know, obviously, whether it had some sort of identifying markers on it or it looked different to the others. I don't know. That could have been the case, but if not, how would this employee have known that that was the exact razor that he'd taken home? At the time of these killings, fingerprinting was introduced, but it wasn't really widely used. Just over a month after the initial killings, on the 27th of June in 1918, the Axeman claimed a further 2 victims. And these were Louis Bessemer and his mistress, Harriet Ann Lowe. They were attacked in the early hours in his bakery in sort of the backwaters where they slept. It was around 7 a.m. when John Zanker, a delivery driver, actually came across the couple. He arrived at the bakery and obviously had expected Louis to be there to receive the goods. When he was there, nobody was around. He decided to go around the back to see what was going on. Maybe Louis had got distracted and didn't realise he was there. So off he went, and that was when he found that a panel had been chiselled out of the back of the door. He came up to where they were sleeping and found that there was blood absolutely everywhere. It was even on the ceiling. And this is when he saw the couple lied on the bed, absolutely drenched in their own blood, but they were still alive. Louis was actually hit with an axe just above his right temple, and this did cause a skull fracture. Harriet had been hacked just over her left ear. Obviously, they were in need of immediate assistance, so he called the authorities to get the help that they needed. Again, the killer had used their own axe against them. It was full of blood in the bathroom. So both of them went to hospital to be treated for their injuries, and Harriet's were a lot more severe than Louis'. Louis actually got released pretty early, and Harriet remained in the hospital to be treated for her wounds. Now, Louis said that he'd woke up as the figure was fleeing the scene, so he wasn't really much help to the authorities. Whilst Harriet was being treated in hospital, the police actually arrested a suspect. Louis Ubicon was a 41-year-old African American who had been employed in the store, and this was just weeks before the attack. And at this point, I do think it's quite important to mention his race, because the main reason that the police give that they arrested this man was that basically he was around at the time, he knew the routine. But what about the white employees that was there? They would have also known their routine, they would have known everything the same as he would have. Why weren't they arrested for the same reasons? It was a very racist time, and this was a very racist thing to do, to arrest the only black man that worked there. And they did hold him for quite a while. They were probably trying to find evidence to pin on him to make him seem like he was the killer, but again, they didn't find anything, so they did release him, and he was cleared. His name was cleared, because after all, he was innocent. Now, Harriet did make a statement, and it didn't really make much sense. At first, she said that she was attacked by a multi-race man, and she did use a very racist term to describe this man, but then later changed it to say that Louis actually attacked her. She actually informed the police that she heard off someone that he was a German spy, and upon confronting him about this, he attacked her with an axe, and then he attacked himself to make it not seem like he was the initial attacker. Louis was actually arrested for being a German spy, because when the police looked into his apartment and whatnot, they did find evidence in the form of letters that were in different languages. He was released 2 days later because, guess what, he actually wasn't a German spy. And the officers that actually arrested him were demoted for unacceptable police work. Louis was one of the lucky ones. He became the first survivor of the Axeman, but Harriet unfortunately was not as lucky. After 7 weeks of treatment, she did unfortunately pass away. After Harriet's death, the police arrested Louis Bessemer one more time. He was charged with murder and actually spent 9 months in prison before being acquitted on the 1st of May in 1919. And get this, it was only a 10-minute jury deliberation before they found him not guilty of murder, after he had been found guilty of murder just months ago. So yeah, I don't really know about that one. There wasn't really any other suspects or leads that the police could find. So the police had 2 double attacks on their hands with no possible clues as to who was responsible. Again, just over a month later, on the 5th of August 1918, Anna Schneider was attacked in the early hours of the evening. She was 28 years old and was actually 8 months pregnant at the time. She woke up to a dark figure looming over her, who actually bashed her repeatedly in the face. Her husband, Ed, came home from work to find her in the bed covered completely in blood. And it was so much so that he didn't actually know where her injury was, because there was just that much blood everywhere that he couldn't tell where it was coming from. She had missing teeth and even her scalp was cut open. So it was a very brutal attack. Remarkably, 2 days later, she actually gave birth to a baby girl. So even though the normal MO of this killer was to use an axe or some sort of other weapon that you could find that was of their own property, it seems like he actually used a bedside lamp to bash her face in, and that just goes to show how brutal the attack must have been. To cut a scalp open and have so much blood, oh, it's just awful to think about. It seems like this killer would use anything he could find, really. So obviously his main go-to was an axe, but say the person didn't have an axe, he would try and find anything that he could, and in this case it was the lamp. Anna did survive the attack but didn't really see her killer, so again she wasn't much help to the authorities, unfortunately. At this point the police were very much split over this case. Some thought that all 3 attacks were done by one person, and others thought that they were various attackers. The police did arrest someone shortly after this attack, and his name was James Gleason. And this was basically because he actually ran away from the police. And they of course arrested him because they thought he'd done something wrong. He was running away from them. What other reason would you have as soon as you saw the police to run away from them other than having done something wrong? He was later released due to lack of evidence, and he had stated that he actually ran away from the police because he'd been arrested numerous times and he didn't want to get arrested again. Which basically didn't work in his favour because it achieved the complete opposite. Because of course he was arrested again, but his name was cleared. Just 5 days later, on the 10th of August 1918, Pauline and Mary Bruno, who were living with their uncle at the time, Joseph Romanio, basically heard a commotion in his room. They went to look what was going on and they uncovered that their uncle had been attacked and suffered 2 blows to the head. He had 2 open cuts. His attacker fled the scene and the girls actually saw a heavy-set man wearing a dark suit and a slouched hat. When the ambulance actually arrived, Joseph did manage to walk to it himself. So it would appear that at the time he wasn't that out of it. Obviously he was quite injured, but not to the point where he had to be lifted to the ambulance himself. He actually walked, even though he was seriously injured. Authorities of course discovered yet another chiselled out panel in the door and found the bloodied axe in his backyard. The house had been ransacked, it had been turned upside down, but nothing was actually stolen. And unfortunately, 2 days after the attack, Joseph Romanio actually passed away from his injuries. Now, chaos kind of consumed the city after this murder, with the citizens, rightly so, terrified of the Axemen of New Orleans. People even reported finding axes in their backyards. How frightened they must have been, especially to be one of those that did find an axe. They probably thought that they were going to be his next victim, and maybe that's how he marked his next targets. It just would have been so scary at the time. A retired Italian detective, Joseph D'Antonio, actually theorised publicly that this was the same person that had killed several people in 1918, and this was due to the similarities in which the attacks were carried out. He also had a theory that the Axemen might have had a dual personality, that he was a law-abiding citizen that was suddenly consumed with the desire to kill. Kind of like a real-life Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. On the 10th of March 1919. So really at this point a significant amount of time has passed since the last attack. Screams were heard coming from the house of Charles and Rosie. Now if I pronounce this wrong I apologise, but I will give it my best go. Cortimigila. Grocer Lolando Giordano rushed over, he heard these screams, he wanted to find out what was going on. And he actually came across Rosie stood in the doorway, clutching her daughter, Mary, that had already tragically lost her life. Mary was only 2 years old and she suffered a killing blow to the back of the neck. And Charles was lying on the floor bleeding. They were rushed to Charity Hospital, and once again the police found the panel chiselled out of the door and a bloody axe on the back porch. Once more, nothing had been stolen. Now what happened next, when I looked into this case and researched it, I did find quite horrible actually. So, both did suffer skull fractures, but Charles was released 2 days later. Rosie remained in hospital, and when she actually came to, she put the blame of the attack on Lolando and his 18-year-old son, Frank. Lolando was a 69-year-old man. He was in kind of poor health to have committed such a crime. And his son was actually more than 6 feet tall. There was no possible way that he could have fit through the small chiselled out panel in the door, and yet they arrested them and charged them with murder anyway. They were later found guilty, with Frank sentenced to hang, and his father would serve life in prison. Then almost a year later, Charles had actually divorced Rosie at this point. She announced that she'd actually falsely accused the pair out of spite and jealousy, and since her statement was literally the only thing that were keeping the pair in jail, thankfully they were actually released. Now, Lolando was the one who actually found them, and Rosie did that to him and his son out of jealousy. I must admit, it really did shock me, and I am very thankful that she did recant it, because they were innocent, and Frank may have actually been hanged for a crime that he didn't commit. On the 13th of March 1919, there was actually a letter, supposedly from the killer, that was published in a newspaper. It said, "They have never caught me, and they never will. They have never seen me, for I am invisible. I am not a human being, but a spirit and a demon from the hottest hell." He then went on about how he would commit another crime at 12:15 AM on the night of the 19th of March. But he would spare anyone's life that played jazz that night because he was very fond of jazz. And of course, the New Orleans dance halls were filled with people and jazz bands. Both professional and amateur people had the bands at their homes playing jazz of hundreds of houses that night. And as he said, no murder actually took place that night. I feel like he did this to show kind of how much power he had over everyone. They were all that scared of him that they did as he wanted, and I mean, who wouldn't? Of course you're going to play jazz so that you're not his next victim. It's not like it was much of an ask to do, so everyone did. And I think this kind of fueled him and just made him feel more powerful. On the 10th of August 1919, Steve Bockert was attacked whilst asleep. He awoke during the night to find a dark looming figure over him. And when he actually came to, because obviously he must have been knocked unconscious, he ran outside on the street to go and investigate. And little did he know, the intruder had actually cracked his head open. He ran to a neighbour and that is where he collapsed. Nothing was stolen. They found the chiseled out panel. Steve luckily did recover from his injuries but couldn't really remember any details of the attack. 3rd of September 1919. Sarah Lumen, who was 19 years old, lived on her own and basically her neighbours went to go and check on her because of this. When they received no response, they actually broke in and found her unconscious on the bed with several teeth missing, and she had a severe head injury. The attacker had climbed into her apartment window and attacked her with a blunt object. The axe was later found on the front lawn of the apartment building. She did recover from injuries, but again, she wasn't able to provide any details of her attacker because simply she just couldn't remember. And now we come to the final alleged victim of the Axeman attacks. On the 27th of October in 1919, Mike Pepitone was attacked in the middle of the night. His wife actually got to his bedroom just as the axe-wielding man was fleeing the scene. Mike had been struck in the head and was covered in blood, and so was most of the room, even including his Virgin Mary painting. His wife was unable to describe any of the characteristics of the killer. So it would seem that the majority of the Axeman victims were either Italian immigrants or Italian Americans, and this led to many believe that the crimes were actually ethnicity motivated. Many media outlets did suggest mafia involvement. Some crime analysts thought that they were sex-related and he was a sadist who targeted females. Criminologists even suggested that he only actually attacked males when they got in the way of him attacking the females. There have even been theories that he did these crimes to promote jazz music. Obviously that's stemming from the letter that was attributed to him. Now, the Axeman was never caught, he was never identified, and his crime spree seemed to stop as mysteriously as it had started. The murderer's identity remains unknown to this day, although, of course, over the years there have been many theories and many possible identifications. Personally, I didn't even really know that the Axemen existed. I'm not gonna lie, I have watched the American Horror Story and obviously it's featured in that, but I just figured that it was a story or a myth from that. But when I actually found out that the Axeman was actually real and he was a real serial killer, I had to look into this case. And I did find it really interesting. How he chiseled out the door panels, he took the time to chisel out the panels. It must have taken him a little while to actually do that. How he wasn't afraid to leave the evidence behind, how he utilised their own weapons against them. And he didn't really care about leaving them behind for the police to find. It was like he wanted them to be found. Now, if it was me, personally, I would definitely bury my axe. I would not be having an axe around the house. I would not be having anything. But again, it did seem like if there wasn't an axe or there wasn't any other weapon there, he would use something else. So it is kind of hard to do that, but anyone could say that you just hide your axe. And Also, I'd play jazz every single night just to make sure that I wasn't the next victim. So guys, I hope you felt the same way about this video as I did. I did find this case really interesting. And please let me know if you want me to look into any other cases for you, and I will do so. Anyway guys, that's all I have on the Axemen of New Orleans. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bye!